Hello, you're watching IDDTalks. My name is Anastasia Lavrina, and today we have a very special guest, former U.S. Ambassador to Azerbaijan, Matthew Bryza. Mr. Bryza, we're welcome to IDDTalks.
Thanks, Ms. Lavrina. Thanks. I'm happy to have a chance to speak with you.
Thank you so much for joining our discussion today. And of course, we are going to cover the U.S. election. Donald Trump wins 2024 presidential election. Your opinion, how will Donald Trump's victory lead to a significant shift in the U.S. foreign policy?
Yeah, well, number one, overall, President Trump, when he was president first time, had questioned the utility of NATO and wondered whether or not it's obsolete. And so that's going to mark a sharp shift, not only from President Biden's foreign policy, for which NATO was a centerpiece, but pretty much for all other U.S. presidents. How far Trump will go and will he pull the U.S. out of NATO remains to be seen, and how much pressure will he put on U.S. allies to come up to not just 2% of their GDP to be spent on defense, but maybe up to 3 or 4% is something he said he's going to pressure our allies to do. He also, in his aides, have said recently that the key litmus test for whether or not a country receives, let's say, benefits or good treatment from the U.S. will be the trade balance. So countries that have, with whom the United States has a trade deficit, so the U.S. imports more from that country than it exports, will not be treated well, whether or not they're a NATO member. Whereas countries to whom the U.S. exports more than from which it imports will be treated well. That's a radical difference. He's also said he's going to put 20% tariffs on all imports from any country, even NATO member states and EU member states, and 60% tariffs on all imports from China. So that's a radical reworking of U.S. trade policy. When it comes to what you specifically asked for, he's made clear that he said even before he becomes president, he'll end Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He can't, but he will push for a brokered agreement of some sort. A lot of people worry that Trump will pressure Zelensky to accept terms that he feels he politically cannot accept. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think Zelensky may be looking for a way to end the war and might welcome President Trump's political cover if Trump also does what he suggested he will do, which is pressure President Putin also to agree to terms that are reasonable, whatever that means toward Ukraine. If you want, we can go into that in more detail. I don't want to talk too long. And when it comes to Israel and its assault on Gaza and Lebanon, Trump is very, very close to Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden has, very poor relations with Netanyahu. Trump has excellent ones. And if you think back to the beginning of Trump's first administration, within the first couple of months, when he made his first statements about the Middle East and the peace process, he said something I have never heard an American president say in recent decades, which is, well, maybe there doesn't need to be a two-state solution. Maybe there just needs to be a one-state solution, which is Netanyahu's approach, and which is utterly rejected by pretty much the rest of the world. So I think Trump he said he's going to end that war as well right away in his first day in office. Obviously, he can't do that on his first day. But I think what his underlying goal in the Middle East is going to be is to help Israel normalize its relations, first and foremost with Saudi Arabia, and then with other Arab states in accordance with, the Abraham Accords that he brokered at the end of his first administration.
Matthew, Donald Trump will return to the presidency at a time of unprecedented conflict and uncertainty in the Middle East. What should we expect from Donald Trump towards the situation in the Middle East? Should we expect the U.S. to send more weapons to Israel, or negotiations will be the top priority for Donald Trump during his presidency?
Yeah, it already is U.S. policy to provide Israel, more weapons per capita than any other country, and that's a Biden policy, and Trump will definitely continue that. As I was saying, he's very close to Netanyahu, and I think he will align with Netanyahu's approach, which is not to pursue a two-state solution, pursue a one-state solution, which means Palestinians will not have their own state. And I think that's a recipe for continued conflict. No matter what Donald Trump wants to do, I think there's no way to end that war in the long run without a political settlement. And there's no political settlement that's possible other than a two-state solution. So I think Trump will be tempted just to support Netanyahu's approach, but will, of course, I think also pressure Netanyahu to reduce the assaults on Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And I don't know where that will come out because the war will just continue if there's not a two-state solution on the horizon. And Saudi Arabia, I think, is unlikely to normalize relations with Israel if there's not a two-state solution coming. So Trump will soon find that his foreign policy goals are in conflict when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians. And how he reacts is anyone's guess.
Matthew, as a former diplomat, you know very well that in the political sphere there is no friends, there are interests. And Donald Trump is a politician who always supports this motto: no friends, only interests, especially when it comes to economy. So what Donald Trump's victory means for China?
Yeah, and that's a cliche of diplomacy that goes back to Henry Kissinger in the 1970s and long before that. That countries don't have friends, they have interests. That is a Trumpian approach. That is not the tradition of U.S. foreign policy since at least the Second World War. So with China, as I said, yeah, he threatens to impose 60% tariffs on all Chinese goods from his first day in office. The Chinese will hate that. But in the meantime, Trump, he thinks of himself as the ultimate deal maker. So if Xi Jinping, between now and when the tariffs come into play, says to Donald Trump, hey, you don't need to do the tariffs here. I guarantee China's going to buy huge amounts, trillions of dollars of U.S. goods. So let's find a way to have a more constructive relationship. I think Trump will go along with that, to be honest. He really seemed to like Xi Jinping, and his first meeting with Xi Jinping was quite positive. And at that point, Trump suspended the trade war between the U.S. and China. So Trump is a deal maker. He's not ideological. He doesn't have really a grand vision. He just has some big concepts that come in and go out from his mind. But for now, he's talking tough and about imposing 60% tariffs on China. If he goes ahead with that, then U.S.-Chinese relations will be very, very difficult.
Well, it's quite clear how Donald Trump will behave towards the situation between Russia and Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, and of course China, which we have already discussed. When we come to our region, the South Caucasus and especially Turkey, the bilateral relations between Turkey and the United States are developing quite stable, but still, in his letter, his congratulations letter to Donald Trump, the president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, was speaking about new era. Like he saying that he hopes Turkey-US relations will be strengthening. Is it possible? What do you think on that?
Yeah, they've been strengthening now for a couple of years, ever since the summer of 2020, when President Erdogan decided to de-escalate in the Eastern Mediterranean and stopped sending Turkish, TPAO, so government-owned oil company exploration vessels into the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey's been on a de-escalatory approach, both toward its European allies and toward the United States. It's obvious that Trump and Erdogan had a positive relationship. They like each other. When I was talking at the beginning of the Biden administration and people would ask me, well, what does it mean that Biden's president? I said, well, because Erdogan and Trump had such a good relationship. If you take Trump out of the equation, like a mathematical equation, things are going to change. And initially the relationship's going to be poor, but eventually the Biden Erdogan relationship will improve, especially because of common interests on Ukraine. So this was in 2021, before Russia's full-scale invasion. And sure enough, the relations have improved as the Biden administration has gone on. And I think that positive trajectory will accelerate now when Trump is in office. I think he will likely, he'll listen to Erdogan with regard to Turkey's grave objections to the U.S. partnership with the YPG, PYD, so the Syrian branch of the PKK terrorist organization. And you may recall that it was Trump who, I think it was in October of 2019, pulled U.S. troops out of northern Syria and left the field to Turkish troops and Russian troops. And that was based on a conversation that Trump had with Erdogan. So I think Trump will look for ways to do transactional deals with Erdogan and Turkey. What I don't know is what Turkey is going to offer in response to the United States, because I don't think Trump really cares about the strategic importance of Turkey, given where it is on the map. It's the geostrategic connection between the Middle East and Syria on the one hand, and Iraq and Iran. and the Black Sea. And so Russia and Georgia and Ukraine, on the other hand, I don't think Trump cares about that. I don't think he thinks that way. I think it's going to come down to what can Erdogan do for me?
Matthew, it's not a secret that Donald Trump, in comparison to Kamala Harris, was concentrating on the domestic issues, economy, immigration, and some other issues related to the domestic policy of the United States. Definitely, he was speaking about the foreign policy priorities, his expectations if he takes this place of presidency. In comparison to him, Kamala Harris was worried more about the foreign policy priorities of the United States. Therefore, what are Trump's policies on trade, migration, and other key issues from your perspectives, from your understanding of the situation? What does he mean talking about the golden age of America?
Well, we already talked about trade, right? 60% tariffs on all Chinese goods coming in, 20% tariffs on any import from any country. When it comes to countries with whom we have a free trade agreement, then that gets a little bit tricky. But I think he'll find ways around that. Overall, also on trade, as I mentioned, his scorecard for foreign policy as to whether or not to treat a country as a friendly one will be whether or not the U.S. has a trade surplus with that country. As I said, whether it imports more from that country, in which case the U.S. will have a bad relationship, or whether the U.S. exports to that country more than it imports. Immigration, he's been transparent. He said he's going to round up millions, maybe tens of millions of of people in the United States, whether we're calling them illegal immigrants, but they're even, seems like his net will catch even some people that are legally in the United States. How he'll do that, I don't know. It will require a gigantic new bureaucracy, but he said he's going to close the border with Mexico, and he's going to arrest and deport people who are in the United States illegally, and maybe even some who are legally in the United States. So that's a radical departure on immigration. You will recall that when he was president, to deter people from trying to cross the U.S. border from the South, he imposed a policy that separated children from their parents when they crossed the border. And there are still hundreds of children who've never been reunited with their parents from way back then. So he will be draconian on immigration. And will deport many, many people is what he claims he's going to do.
Well, Matthew, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Anastasia. Good questions. Pleasure to be with you.